Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a vast, silent forest just before dawn. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, and the only sound is the distant, rhythmic pulse of your own heartbeat. You've been running for so long that your muscles burn. Your breath comes in ragged gasps, and your mind is a blur of half-formed thoughts, each one a shadow you've been desperate to outpace. But here, in this moment, you stop. Not because you've reached safety, not because you've found answers, but because something inside you, something deeper than fear, older than instinct, whispers, there is nowhere left to run. And so you stand there, trembling, as the first light of morning spills through the trees. The realization creeps in like a slow tide. You were never running from something out there. You were running from the one thing you can never escape, yourself. The paradox of flight. Here's the unsettling truth. The more you run, the louder. The footsteps behind you grow. You've tried everything: distraction, achievement, addiction, even reinvention. You've buried yourself in work, lost yourself in love, drowned yourself in noise. And yet in the quiet between breaths, when the world falls away and you're left alone with your thoughts, it is still there. The gnawing, the restlessness, the unshakable sense that you're missing something, or worse, that you're being chased by something you refuse to name. What if the very act of running is what gives it power? Think of the dreams where you're being pursued, legs heavy as lead, the threat just out of sight. The terror isn't in the thing chasing you, it's in the not knowing. The moment you turn to face it, the dream shifts. The monster becomes a mirror. The fear becomes clarity. So why can't you do the same in waking life? What are you so afraid to see? Is it the parts of yourself you've disowned? The anger, the grief, the desires you've labeled unacceptable? Is it the life you could have lived if you'd made different choices? Or is it simpler, darker? The suspicion that beneath all the roles you play, there might be no one there at all. We spend our lives building identities like fortresses, career, relationships, beliefs, not to keep the world out, but to keep ourselves contained. Because the alternative is standing in the open, exposed, with nothing between you and the infinite, void of your own existence. But what if the void isn't the enemy? What if the thing you've been running from isn't a monster but a key? This is the moment the chase ends, not with a confrontation but with a surrender, not with a victory but with a question so disarming it unravels everything. What if you stopped running, not because you've won, but because you finally realized there was never anything to outrun? The answer isn't in the distance you've covered, it's in the footprints you've left behind, the ones you've been too afraid to retrace. And so, as the sun rises over the trees, casting long shadows across the ground, you do the one thing you've never allowed yourself. You turn around, the forest is behind you now, the chase is over, but the silence is louder than ever. You thought stopping would bring relief. Instead, you feel the weight of something vast and nameless pressing against your ribs, the accumulated force of every avoided thought, every suppressed emotion, every unlived version of yourself you've locked away. It doesn't roar, it hums, a low, insistent frequency that vibrates in your bones. This is the hidden problem. You were never afraid of the darkness inside you. You were afraid of the light, the illusion of separation. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the parts of ourselves we exile to the unconscious because they contradict who we think we should be. But here's the cruel irony. The more we deny these fragments, the more they control us. A man who refuses to acknowledge his anger becomes passive-aggressive. A woman who disowns her ambition grows resentful. A society that shuns vulnerability breeds epidemics of loneliness. We fragment ourselves to survive, but in doing so, we forget how to live. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this division as humanity's greatest sickness. One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. But we've mistaken chaos for an enemy, so we numb it. We drown it in productivity, in scrolling, in substances, in the desperate curation of a self that feels acceptable. And yet, what is the self, if not the sum of all you've tried to hide? The Existential Escape Room, Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "We are condemned to be free, a brutal truth. Freedom means responsibility, and responsibility is terrifying. It's easier to pretend we're trapped by our past, by our genes, by society's expectations, than to admit we've been holding the key all along." Viktor Frankl, surviving the Holocaust, observed a paradox. Those who found meaning in their suffering endured the unimaginable, while those who lost meaning perished even when physically unharmed. But modern life has inverted this. We chase comfort to avoid suffering, only to find that comfort becomes the suffering. A life devoid of friction is a life devoid of meaning. So we invent new ways to run. The hedonist's trap, pleasure as distraction. Chasing highs that leave you emptier than before. The achiever's delusion, using success as a shield. If I accomplish enough, maybe I'll outrun the void. The spiritual bypass, using enlightenment as an excuse to avoid facing your humanity. But the void isn't a flaw, it's a compass. The fear of wholeness. Here's the psychological twist no one tells you. We resist healing because it demands disintegration. First, to become whole, you must first admit you're fractured. To reclaim your power, you must admit you gave it away. To find yourself, you must lose every identity you've clung to. This is why most people never stop running, not because they're cowards, but because the prospect of facing nothing feels worse than the exhaustion of the chase. Arthur Schopenhauer saw this clearly. A man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants. We're enslaved by our own desires, especially the desire not to want what we truly do. The cultural hypnosis, Aldous Huxley, warned of a world where people would adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. Look around. We've built a society that rewards distraction and punishes presence. We've made it taboo to be alone with our thoughts, to question deeply, to stop. But the real prison isn't the noise, it's the belief that silence is dangerous. The fork in the path, you're standing at the threshold now. Behind you, the well-worn path of avoidance, littered with the husks of half-lived lives. Ahead, the uncharted territory of seeing yourself clearly for the first time. This isn't about self-improvement, it's about self-reclamation. The question isn't, how do I fix myself? But what parts of me have I been taught to hate? The answer will terrify you, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you stop running, you'll realize the monster was never in the shadows. It was the shadow itself. Silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that settles like a fog after a battle, thick, disorienting, heavy with the unspoken. This is what happens when you stop running. The distractions fall away, the masks crack, and suddenly you're left staring at the architecture of your own avoidance, brick by brick. You thought the chase was the hard part, but standing still, this is where the real reckoning begins. The ripple effect of avoidance. Every time you refused to face yourself, a consequence took root. Not in dramatic collapses, but in quiet, cumulative distortions. The self you outsource. You let others define your worth, so now you oscillate between craving approval and resenting it. The emotions you bury, they don't dissolve. They metastasize into insomnia, into unexplained rage, into a body that keeps score. The life you postpone. The someday dreams now carry the bitter taste of time you can't reclaim. This isn't hypothetical, it's neurological. Studies on repressive coping show that avoiding negative emotions amplifies their physiological toll. Elevated cortisol, weakened immunity, a brain that mistakes stillness for danger. You've been living with the emergency brake on, the cognitive hall of mirrors. Your mind isn't just avoiding pain, it's rewriting reality to justify the avoidance. Confirmation. Bias. You seek evidence that you're fine and dismiss what challenges the facade, the spotlight effect. You overestimate how much others notice your flaws, so you shrink to avoid judgment, the illusion of control. You fixate on micromanaging external chaos because facing internal chaos feels too vast. These aren't flaws, they're survival mechanisms, but when left unchecked, they build a prison where every thought loops back to one silent scream: don't look down. The cultural echo chamber society rewards the runners. Hustle. Culture glorifies exhaustion as a virtue. Because tired people don't ask existential questions. Consumerism sells you solutions to problems you didn't have until they invented them. Spiritual. Consumerism turns enlightenment into another product, another destination, another thing to achieve. You've been gaslit into believing your restlessness is ambition, your numbness is peace, and your dissociation is mindfulness. But deep down, you know this isn't living, this is performing living. Fair body keeps. Score your avoidance isn't just psychological, it's embodied. The clenched jaw you don't notice until it aches. The stomach that knots when you're near someone who sees through you. The breath you've been holding since you were old enough to know what shame felt like. Bessel van der Kolk's research on trauma reveals a chilling truth. The body says what words cannot. But what happens when you've spent years silencing its language? The shadow economy. Every denied emotion becomes debt. Every suppressed desire becomes interest. And the longer you defer payment, the higher the cost. Relationships grow transactional. You love in halves, afraid to need or be needed. Creativity withers. You can't create from a self you're afraid to acknowledge. Time accelerates. Days blur into years when you're not fully present for either. This isn't doom. It's physics. Energy doesn't disappear, it transforms. And what you refuse to face doesn't vanish, it migrates. The turning point. There's a moment, subtle but seismic, when you realize you're not afraid of falling apart. You're afraid of what might emerge if you do. Because disintegration precedes reintegration. Breakdown precedes breakthrough. And the very thing you've been running from, it wasn't chasing you, it was trying to wake you up. The moment arrives without fanfare. No epiphany, no lightning strike, just a quiet, unshakable knowing. You cannot. Go back to running. The old ways no longer work. The distractions have lost their flavor, the masks no longer fit. You stand at the precipice of the most dangerous and liberating choice you will ever make. To turn and face what you've spent a lifetime fleeing. The first rule of rebellion: stop negotiating with yourself. You've tried compromise before. I'll face my fears after I'm more secure. I'll deal with my trauma when I have time. I'll pursue my truth once I please everyone else. These aren't plans. They are surrender documents written in invisible ink. The rebellion begins when you stop bartering with your own soul. When you realize clarity doesn't come from preparing to live, it comes from the act of living itself. The counterintuitive weapon: radical acceptance. This is not passive resignation. It's the alchemical act of staring directly at what is. I'm afraid, and I choose to move forward anyway. I don't have answers, and I refuse to pretend I do. This pain is part of me, but it is not all of me. Carl Jung's shadow work wasn't about eliminating darkness. It was about integrating it. The monster under the bed loses its power when you drag it into the light and realize it was just a forgotten piece of you all along. The daily revolution's rebellion happens in micro moments. The pause before the numbness. When you reach for your phone, the bottle, the busyness, stop. Breathe. Ask, What am I trying not to feel right now? The sacred discomfort. Sit with the awkward silence in conversations instead of filling it. Stand still when the urge to people please rises. The truth-telling. Start small. I don't know. I'm not okay. I want something different. Watch how the world doesn't end when you stop lying. These acts seem insignificant. They are anything but. Each one is a brick torn from the prison wall. The enemies of emergence expect resistance, both internal and external. The comfortable. Those who profit from your staying small will protest your growth, even unconsciously. The inner critic. It will. Weaponize nostalgia for times when ignorance felt like bliss. The illusion of arrival. There is no finish line. Liberation is a daily practice, not a trophy. When Nietzsche wrote, "You must become chaos to give birth to a dancing star," he wasn't offering poetry. He was issuing a warning. Transformation destroys before it creates. Here's the secret no. One tells you, the more you embrace your contradictions, the more whole you become. The artist who owns her self-doubt creates more boldly than the one who fakes confidence. The leader who admits his vulnerability inspires deeper loyalty than the one clinging to infallibility. The lover who says, "I'm scared but I'm here," builds stronger bonds than the one performing fearlessness. This is the great inversion. Your weaknesses become your weapons when you stop hiding them. The point of no return. There will come a day, maybe today, when you realize you've been looking for a map when what you needed was a mirror. The rebellion isn't about overthrowing governments or systems. It's about the quiet coup of waking up one morning and realizing you no longer recognize the person who used to run. The forest is gone. The footsteps have faded. Even the weight in your chest has dissolved into something else entirely, not lightness but space. You stand at the center of an impossible truth. You were never broken. All those years of running, fixing, seeking, hiding, they weren't failures. They were the exact friction required to wear down the illusion that you were separate from yourself to begin with. The grand illusion unraveled. Every spiritual tradition whispers it in different languages. Tat tvam asi, you are that. The Upanishads, the kingdom of God is within you's Christianity. You are the universe expressing itself as a human for a little while. Alan Watts. But here's what the mystics rarely admit. Knowing this, intellectually, changes nothing. You had to live the separation to truly understand it was never real. Like a child fearing monsters under the bed, you needed to turn on the light yourself. No amount of parental reassurance could replace that visceral revelation. The cosmic joke, the final punchline. There was nowhere to run because there was no runner. The you that felt incomplete. The you that chased validation. The you that agonized over past and future. That was never your totality. It was a character you played so convincingly that even you were fooled. This isn't nihilism, it's the opposite. You are so much vaster than the story you mistook for yourself. The alchemy of embodiment. Now comes the sacred paradox. To transcend the ego, you must first fully inhabit it. The anger you suppressed, it becomes fierce compassion. The neediness you hid, it transforms into radical interdependence. The flaws you agonized over, they reveal themselves as fractal beauty, like an oyster turning grit into pearl. Your greatest wounds become entry points for the light you thought you'd lost. The end of. Seeking or spiritual seeking contains a hidden arrogance. I am here and enlightenment is there. But when the seeking stops, you realize you weren't climbing a mountain to reach the summit. You were the mountain all along. The Japanese concept of satori describes this perfectly. Not gradual enlightenment, but instantaneous realization. That what you sought was never separate from who you are. The ultimate responsibility. With this realization comes a quiet revolution in responsibility. If there's no separate self to blame, There's no separate self to coddle either. Your past doesn't own you, it initiated you. Your flaws don't define you, they humanize you. Your future isn't a destination, it's an unfolding. This is Viktor Frankl's logotherapy taken to its logical extreme. Meaning isn't found, it's forged in the present moment's fire. So here you stand, not fixed but free, not perfect but present. The great irony? All those years running from yourself were the exact pilgrimage required to arrive here, at the realization that there's nowhere to arrive. The treasure wasn't hidden. You were just looking from the wrong angle. The Zen masters say, before enlightenment chop wood carry water, after enlightenment chop wood carry water, but oh, what different water, what different wood, the chase is over, now begins the unimaginable part, living as if you were always enough.